Uh, Gandhiji had once advised us that when we are in doubt about whether we are going on the right path, think of the poorest, the most vulnerable person that you know, and think of what we are doing. Is it making sense to them? Will it make their life better? I just thought that in the world that we are living in, where we've decided to expel poor people from our conscience and our consciousness, and we have allowed hate and fear to define to overshadow our sense of what is just and human. I just wanted you to capture for a moment the images of a whole lot of millions of Indians and the lives that they still live. And I think that really summarizes to me what are the challenges to secular democracy in India today. The battle is not going to be fought anywhere else. The battle has to start with our own hearts and minds. Because it is there that we need to care, we need to intervene, we need to resist. I work with homeless children, and there was a little boy called Ratul. He had run away from his home because of abuse, and he'd grown up in the railway platform in Delhi. So he was talking about a life of enormous abuse and difficulty, etc. So when he was completed his story, I told him, I said, there must be at least one good adult whom you remember, whom you've encountered in your life. Because his family, the police, the men in the station, everybody had been so brutal to him. So who's the good person you know? So he didn't hesitate very long. In fact, immediately he said, yes, there's this person, Obra Bhai, he's really a very good man. So I said, who is he? So he said, he's a pickpocket. And I must confess that, being a middle class person, I was a little startled by his choice as to how he could select this pickpocket as the best human being that he has encountered. Then he explained to me, he said that, this boy is also, he's older than us, but he's grown up also on the railway station. But when we are sick, he's the one who comes and gives us medicine. When people beat us, he's the one who comes to protect us. When we take drugs, he's the one who comes and stops us and says that don't take drugs. You will die here. You have a whole future in front of you. Build your life, save yourself for something better. And when he spoke, I thought of the hundreds and thousands of times that all of us, on a cold winter night in Delhi, you drive past after a late night show and or a party, and you can see in the smoke forms of these children sleeping at 1 and 2 degrees. None of us have a moment to stop and ask, what that person, what the child needs, or to do something for that child, let alone have dreams for the child's future. And I started thinking that maybe Ratul was right in picking the pickpocket over all of us. It is in the end, one can ask, in this bleak picture, do I still see hope? I see enormous hope. I see enormous hope primarily in the way that ordinary people in this country still lead their lives. Not educated people like you and I. I think there's an enormous paradox. We had expected that with education, why did we want everybody to be literate and educated and have very good schools? We had hoped that with that, not just that we would get better jobs, which is really happening all over the world. The expectation was that with education we would also be more tolerant, more kind, more liberal, less prejudiced. But actually, The very reverse seems to be happening. And I'd say this perhaps a little provocatively, but I worked long and intensely with very poor people and disadvantaged people, and it hits me how they seem to be holding on to the secularity of India much more authentically than most of us are. For every story of brutality that I saw in Gujarat, for instance, today I can say that there are at least 3 stories of kindness, and that is really the untold story of Gujarat itself. The numbers of people who would have died could have been many times more, except that in village after village after village, in fact at every street corner, you found people who risked their lives to save people of the other community. And it's not, it's not just here. Ashish Nandi was telling me that they undertook a very massive study on partition memories, both sides of the border. People who are still alive, recalling what happened in partition. My own family was in Pakistan and had to run away, and very brutal killings and so on. One remarkable thing has emerged from that study. They have found that in both sides of the border, more than 26% of people say that their lives were saved by people of the other community. And they actually feel that that is a gross underestimation, because many people are so angry that they are not willing to admit. They did a similar study of the Jews and Germans, and the study showed 0.2% Germans, they call them the righteous Gentiles, had saved Jews. So there is that capacity civilizationally that we seem to have, which we are losing so fast, of reaching out to each other in these difficult times. In fact, this study that Ashish Nandi was involved in, it started off with one incident. A woman in Pakistan, a Muslim woman, was describing how she was still alive today. And this is a story she told. She said that she had been abducted by a Sikh young man who was trying to molest her. And the boy's father intervened, and he said that you're doing the wrong thing and I won't let you. And the boy replied that the whole world is doing it, why should I not do it? And he persisted with his molestation. The father took out a gun and shot his son dead. And the woman today is relating this story. I've heard many such stories in Gujarat. I've heard, just give an example. There was somebody who told me that in this village, our life was 110 Muslims were given shelter in our village by one farmer. So I had imagined that he must be some very rich landlord, and he kept us for 10 days. So I went to see him, and I was surprised to find that he was a very modest, small farmer. And the story then unfolded that they said that their houses had been burnt and they were attacked, etc. So they went and hid in the fields. Night fell, and they were terrified, and the children were hungry, and they knew that this man was compassionate. So they took their chance and they went to his door and they said, please, let us just stay one night. And without hesitation he said, why one night? You will stay here as long as it is necessary for you to be here, to be safe. And he took in the 110 people into his house. And he opened up the stores of grain that he had. You know, the farmers there keep the whole year's stock. And without hesitation, he and his wife opened that out. They prepared food. 10 days, these people stayed there. And the Muslims were describing that, the extended family was gathered by him, and the men used to stand night and day outside, protecting them, not letting any mob come close. And they threatened them, they taunted them, they set fire to his fields, they set fire to a part of his house, but he didn't hesitate for a moment. And they said, even at the end of 10 days, they insisted, they said, how long will we stay here? Let us go to a relief camp. And in their insistence, finally they went. And they said that even after that, he used to come and visit us in the relief camp. And he used to weep when he saw our children hungry in the camp and not cared for. Very modest, I went to see him. He was very modest and very embarrassed, he and his wife, that I thought he'd even done something extraordinary. So I asked him, I said that, why did you do it? And he couldn't really give me an answer. And then he thought for a long time and he said, how could I bear it that people of my village were treated this way? Then he added, this village belongs to the Muslims as much as it belongs to me. When he said it, I was wishing that many of my friends would say with the same conviction that this country belongs to the Muslims as much as it belongs to me. I then asked him, I asked his wife, I said that you must have at least been frightened when all of this happened, and she got quite angry. She said again very simply, she said, when you're doing the right thing, how can you be frightened? Then I said that, your entire grain stores finished for the year. So at least that must have been, a regret. And he said that no, God ensured that after that we would get a wonderful harvest. And in fact, we've had recurring good harvest. And our grain stores have never been empty since that day. God has ensured that. And I just thought again that, our idea of secularism, of somebody who's so deeply devout to his own faith, was what drove him to actually save people of the other faith. That, I think, is where I derive hope, and I still believe that secular democracy will survive because our ordinary people know what it is to live with peace and love. Thank you.
I don't think it's going to rain. Those of you who are willing to bear out will still spend some time doing Manthan Hyderabad.
A very hypothetical question I would like to ask you. Knowing India better than anybody else, I think you should answer me. 2018, November 27th, how do you see India?
That's one of the toughest questions I think I've ever encountered. As I said, I have hope. I have a lot of hope. Largely because I see resistance. I observe various acts of resistance by ordinary people to the way the world is going. And I spoke of one. I'll just tell you another about where I see hope. I see in India which still holds together after a lot of violence and hate plays itself out. Again in Gujarat, there's a mazar which is well known, which was demolished right in the center of a road in Ahmedabad, of Bali Gujarati. It's one of the symbols of what happened in 2002, because the mazar was razed to the ground and a road was constructed overnight over it, and today vehicles fly over it. I met a family which traditionally looks after the mazar for many generations. So they told me something very beautiful. They said that every time there was a riot in Ahmedabad, this mazar used to be attacked and demolished, and it was always the Hindus of the local community who would gather money, collect money and rebuild it. They said now it was impossible to build because there was a road over it. But he said these same families, every night, they come, late into the night, and they place flowers at that very place where that mazar stood. And in the morning the sweeper comes and he sweeps away those flowers. But to my mind, it is really the ordinary person's quiet act of resistance to that injustice in which I see hope.
As I told you over tea, we have a Yahoo group on which continuous debate goes on. And as I had also told you, in the last 2 weeks we've been discussing Harsh Mander. Now, 3-4 issues that came up, and I thought I should voice them for your response, especially for this audience. One of the issues that was raised was, if, as you all say, that it was Narendra Modi and the government and the bureaucrats and the politicians who were culprit at that time, why is it that not one has been brought to book so far? Is it really true? Is it really true that it was perpetrated by who you claim it to have been perpetrated? That's one that has come out. The second issue that has come out is that post 2002, Gujarat has undergone dramatic development, and Narendra Modi has offered probably the best governance in the country. And one contributor to the group was had said that he will probably make the best prime minister that we could have, and that he should be the prime minister. I think he said it's time that we move on. Don't look back at what happened and move on. That's probably the best thing for the country. I think I had told the group that these are issues on which I'll ask Harsh to respond.
The second first, I think, many people are saying this. Ratan Tata, for instance, spoke about the good aim and the bad aim. And to my mind, in the end, the good aim was money, and the bad aim was massacre. It is debatable whether Gujarat's economic prosperity, to what extent was it something that was an ongoing process to which Narendra Modi certainly contributed, or whether it was something that was created by him exclusively, etc. But I think that is completely irrelevant to the larger question. The question is that do we really believe? It's a very similar question that was asked in the mid-1930s in the context of Germany, when Hitler was able to revive the sagging economy. And ironically, actually, one of the memories of Hitler's regime is actually the Beetle Volkswagen car. It's one of the symbols of their economic revival and prosperity. The issue that I have is that can you call governance good when it, let us assume that it was entirely Mr. Modi's credit that Gujarat is economically prosperous today. Even let us assume that that is true. Is it irrelevant that he was responsible, not just responsible for a massacre, but what I believe much more grave than the massacre was its aftermath, which is much less spoken about. So, coming back to the first question, that was he really complicit in the massacre itself? I think there's an enormous amount of evidence now. In fact, the Telka tapes was just one of many bits of evidence that have added up. But to my mind, you don't need, I've worked long enough in the service to be able to say to you that no riot can go on for more than even a few hours without the active complicity of the state. You don't even require further evidence. It happened in 1984, it happened here, it happened even if one official had decided to perform their duty in Ahmedabad, they could have called in the army. He did not require anybody's permission. They were empowered. They could have called in the army. They could have imposed curfew. They could have, restored law and order. It is possible. It has been done. It has been done repeatedly. And the enormity of a crime where people whose duty is to protect people's lives. India, when India became free, we chose to have a democratic government at the central level and at the state level. But somewhere at the district level, we had chosen to persist with the colonial form of a bureaucracy, which actually effectively heads the government at the district level. Why did we do it? We did it because in the context of how India became free with 1 million people dying and the bloody partition, it was expected that politicians may inflame passions and so on. But it was always, it was hoped and believed that there would still be this group which would do their duty, which would be fair, which would perform their constitutional duty and protect people impartially. And that is what would hold the country together. That had begun to decline, and Gujarat, I think, saw its lowest depth, and that is what moved me so greatly with anguish, because the kind of brutality that happened was accomplished, could have only been accomplished with the highest of political leadership and complete application and complicity by state authorities. I mean, I think that it's almost self-evident, but there's a great deal of other evidence around it. But the more important question is what I was coming back to, that it was not just the massacre, but what happened afterwards. This is the only incident where we've had a massacre or a communal carnage. 2 lakh people were displaced, terrified, ran out of their homes. The government refuses to even set up relief camps. And the government, I mean, it's never happened. What is a relief camp? It means that when people have run away in fear and or lost their homes, the state has to protect them, has to take them into protected enclaves and take care of them till it is possible for them to return to their homes. You have a government which says, I refuse to set up relief camps. And when the Chief Minister was asked, why are you not setting up relief camps? He said, I don't want to set up baby producing factories. And I don't think I can recall a constitutionally elected head of government talking about a segment of his citizens with that degree of contempt. I don't regard that as good governance, as evidence of good governance. I find it the most shameful attitude of governance. It was left to the battered community to find its own protection. And where did they do it? They did it in, where would a poor community find places? Many of the relief camps finally were set up by the Muslim community in graveyards, because that was really the only place within their areas which was open. And so you have people, almost 2 lakh people living in places like graveyards, protecting themselves over several months. And I saw the camps. I mean, there was 14,000, 15,000, 20,000 people in these dargahs or graveyards. It took, there were 9 in Shah Alam camp, which was the most actually high-profile camp. There were 9 toilets and bathing places. It used to take you 10 days before you had a chance to go once to have a bath. I mean, you cannot treat a segment of your citizens this way only because they happen to be children of a lesser god in your eyes. I don't regard this as good governance. I don't think that these are minor aberrations that can be overlooked in this larger picture of economic prosperity. Because economic prosperity without a sense of equal democratic rights, to my mind, is meaningless. And the story went on. I mean, there was an enormous subversion of justice. There was even these camps were forcefully closed down, so people were forced out of these camps because they wanted to have elections, and elections were not possible. Instead of remorse, there was a Gaurav Yatra. I mean, there has been repeatedly, never once an expression of even regret that this happened. Instead of remorse, there's an expression of celebration of a massacre, etc. To my mind, none of this is evidence of good governance. Only because we believe it is happening to somebody else that we find it acceptable. But to my mind, the Muslims are not someone else. To me, they're all my own people, and it affects me as much as it would happen if people of the community to which I was born were yes.
What happened in Kashmir? I mean, was it something like this?
Kashmir is a...
the mic is somewhere?
Or Mike?
You want to ask the next question?
Hey,
No, there's one more mic around.
behind
The
here.
question is about Kashmir.
Can you?
What about Kashmir?
No, what
about Kashmir?
What about
What about-
Kashmir?
What's the question?
What is the question about?
You're talking about Gujarat. So I was just thinking what happened in Kashmir.
You want to know what happened in Kashmir?
Kashmiri Pandits being driven out of Kashmir.
You want to know about Kashmiri Pandits being driven out of
It's a similar situation,
There's
but in
only
a
one
different
mic.
era.
That mic is using.
It has similarities and it has differences. Kashmir, I don't think was ever a communal
Need the mic?
divide. Kashmir has never had a communal divide until very recently. I mean, I think what was distinct about Kashmiri culture was precisely the fact that people lived together. I think it is extremely tragic that a segment of that politics reached a point, but the demand from the early 80s, late 80s was never one of against the Kashmiri Pandits. But the fact that a situation of insecurity was created, when fear was created, people were displaced, had to move away from their homelands, is a matter of enormous anguish. A question that I'm asked, which you not asked directly, which I will ask and I'll also answer, is that why are you then not fighting for the rights of the Kashmiri Pandits who are displaced, and why are you speaking out about the displaced people in Gujarat? It's a question that I'm asked. I'm asked it not just by you, I'm asked by many people, including, for instance, my own extended family. As it happens, as I said, my parents belong to Rawalpindi, which is in... My parents belong to Rawalpindi, and they were uprooted very brutally in those times. I've grown up hearing those very stories about how much violence happened, how much brutality happened. Our village was the village in which actually it is a well-known story of women who had threw all the women and jumped into the well and killed themselves because of the communal ash. So many of my extended family, I mean, I've got estranged from many of them. Many of them say, why are you on the wrong side? Why are you taking the side of Muslims? Another set of, opposite side of that is that after this happened in 2002, there were many gatherings where I was called, where Muslims, people of Muslim identity stood up and said, we want to thank you for all that you have done for our people. And my response was that, A, what I've done is not extraordinary. I've only done what I felt was truthful and according to my conscience. But, more importantly, who said they were just your people? They're equally my people, and if they're equally my people, then where's the spaces for gratitude? I just find a question that why am I not speaking for Kashmiri Pandits, meaning that, you're not looking at, why aren't you doing something with the Kashmiri Pandits? If you feel strongly, you go ahead, and will I oppose you, will I support you? We are both, fighting for human rights. I support you, you support me. It's not a question of why. I'm not responsible for taking every cause. I've decided to take a particular. You can say, why is Medha Patkar not fighting against child sexual abuse? Doesn't mean that she supports child sexual abuse, but she's chosen to fight on a particular issue. If I was a Muslim, I would probably be fighting on the side of Hindus. I've been born in a Hindu family, so I feel that majority community has a greater responsibility when minority is under stress. But I think there's a bigger question also in the specificities of the displaced Kashmiri people and the displaced people in Gujarat, in colonies who continue to be displaced. The biggest difference is the attitude of the state. I described how the state has treated the people who were, they refused to set up relief camps. The camps were forcibly displaced. They're continuing to live in camps which are completely unsupported by government. They're living in complete destitution. Kashmiri Pandits are getting, which is right that they should be, but the state for the last 15 years is giving 4,000 rupees per family, is supported, has set up camps, is performing its duty as it should in a democracy in relation to that segment of people. And therefore I feel less of a need to stand up and demand that they get their rights. If the state was being unjust in relation to the rehabilitation and the rights of Kashmiri Pandits, I would have probably been there also speaking up there. So I mean it is, but I just find it's an inevitable question. I'm just waiting. Every place I've spoken, and I've spoken from the smallest village to the to Los Angeles, this is a question that I know will be asked. And I find it extraordinary that it is asked. And I can anticipate it, and I could have taken care. I mean, as soon as I got off this, somebody came into the room and said, "I'm so distressed, you never spoke about Kashmiri Pandits. What about us Hindus? Why don't you stand on the side of the Hindus when they're oppressed?" I said, most of my life I've actually been fighting for Dalits who are Hindus. I've been, fighting for people with leprosy who are Hindus. I mean, 90% I've fought for manual scavengers and their rights if they're Hindus. But but I mean, we're talking about until we reach a stage when we look at injustice as something that involves us. That we are on the side and our solidarities are with whoever is suffering injustice. Until we start, as long as we continue to look at injustice through our own eyes, our sectarian eyes, and it happens everywhere. I mean, when if we have a meeting in Delhi on the 1984 riots, I see the entire hall full of people with turbans. When I have a meeting on Gujarat, most of the audience is Muslim. Why should the Muslims not be concerned about people in the 84 riots? Many people in Gujarat itself have said to me, why we really feel disturbed as to how our Dalit and Adivasi brothers and sisters who lived as our neighbors for generations turned against us, and they were really the foot soldiers of it. They killed, they attacked. How did they do this? My reply to them is that I understand your pain and your anguish that your neighbors turned against you. But I also have a question, that all the time when the Dalit and Adivasi was being oppressed, how many times did you speak out in their solidarity and support? And for instance, all across Gujarat, Dalits are not allowed to drink water from the upper caste well. I'm still looking for a village in Gujarat where the Muslims said, okay, you're not being allowed to drink water from that well, why don't you come to our well and drink? But there's no such village. So we've all built boundaries. I feel pain only when my people are affected. And I define my people in terms of my religious and ethnic and other identities. I want to see in India where when women are being battered, men stand and fight. When Dalits are being attacked, upper caste people come and fight. When Muslims are being attacked, Hindus come and fight. That's my belief.
Let's go on the back.
Hello. So I have two questions here. The first question.
One at a time. Finish one, let the answer come, and we're getting mixed up between questions.
I'll ask the first question, get the answer, and get to the second question. The first question, sir, here is with respect to the word secularity. Secularity is done, loved, respected because probably it helps equity in everywhere in the country. So my first question is, the way India is going right now, aren't we going the Sri Lanka way? In Sri Lanka, we had the Sinhalese and the Tamilians. Tamilians were the minorities. We had 4 people, one of them a 17-year-old boy called Velupillai Prabhakaran, some XYZ. He went to a village in Jaffna and told, this is my village, nobody is going to enter it, and he started capturing it. That Jaffna is now LTE hub. So we have in India places like Lucknow, Azamgarh, Hyderabad. Don't you think that happening in India? Because what is happening in India is what we just saw now in the video. Years and years of oppression, and suddenly you will have all these people coming in saying that you can't do this to us anymore, not in a democratic way but in a very in a violent way. So don't you see that happening in India? If that happens in India in the future, I think that's really scary. That's my first question.
No, of course it's scary, and that's precisely when I said that until we build solidarities between oppressed people rather than against each other, this will continue. But the division that you're talking about, the ghettoization in Gujarat, I keep going back to Gujarat largely because I worked intensely there for the last few years. In Gujarat, one of the words that you hear all the time, and it's a terrifying word, is border. People say कि border के इस पार है या उस पार है. Have you gone? And what is border? Every city, every town and every village now has been divided by what people describe as a border. The Muslims have been, you know, if they're living in any other part of the village or town, one of the conditions if they return, many villages have been completely cleansed, in inverted commas. People have not been allowed to return all these years. And if they return, one of the first conditions is that they're going to live separately in segregated settlements. That nobody will have any economic relations, nobody will have any social relations. And that has been accomplished under the same governance that we speak about. You've completely, what we have done to Dalits over 2000 years has been accomplished over the last 6 years of good governance in Gujarat. They have been reduced to exactly that same status. They cannot live in the main colony, they live separately, nobody has any economic social relations with them, nobody calls them for weddings, nobody calls them for any functions. So we have segregated each other. So you'll have these small pockets of Muslim domination, you'll have large pockets of Hindu domination, and we are building these borders between ourselves.
I'll just squeeze in a quick question here. You probably analyzed Gujarat, Bombay, Delhi. How much of the perpetration do you think is because of government complicity versus government willful inaction?
Yeah, acts of omission and acts of commission. Government is guilty in both, because simply by not acting is the best way. And the National Human Rights Commission, in fact, after Gujarat, wrote a very strong ruling where they said, they used some Latin term, but simply the fact that this massacre took place establishes the guilt of the state administration. Actually, you need no further evidence, because at the very least, it failed to act willfully. At the worst, it was actively complicit in planning the massacre. But both of those are acts of very serious guilt. I really compare it, say, if somebody is walking down the road and you kill somebody, it's a great crime. But you go to a doctor, a surgeon, and on the operation table, the surgeon deliberately kills the patient. It's a crime of a very different magnitude. I believe that if you and I are communal in our actions and we participate in a communal riot, it's bad enough. But if somebody whose entire, who gets power, authority, whose entire purpose of that person, the core of that person's profession, is to protect people regardless of their faith and their identity and their caste in the community, actively participates or fails to act, then that is a crime of a very different magnitude. So I think that there's been a debate, there have been scholars who've studied communal riots in India. One of them is somebody called Paul Brass, and one of the things that he has said is that we should not even talk. He said it's inappropriate to describe riots in India as riots. He's saying that you very rarely have riots, because riots suggest a spontaneous clash between people of two religious identities. He's saying that in India we have largely witnessed pogroms.
Premeditated.
Pogroms is where the state is actively partisan and on the side of organizations which are communal, and by its actions, both of action and lack of action, it is actually a party in these massacres. It's not like it's an impartial body which is waiting and Hindus and Muslims are deliberately fighting each other and the state is this impartial arbiter. That is what you would say in a communal riot situation. But a pogrom is where the state is actually a party in most cases of communal violence.
Sir, actually I have been reading your articles, I have been very impressed with them, and I would say that 90% of what you have said, I fully agree with that. And I find that your persona is very similar to what Gandhi had. And the value system that you have professed over here. Two things which I find very similar to Gandhi about you is that you are very passionate about what you feel and you have very strong convictions, and in India we are lacking these. We need people with passion. But I would like to clarify one or 2 points. You mentioned about Ashoka, the King Ashoka. I do not consider him to be secular, though he was pacifist and non-violent, because he took Buddhism as a state religion and he used all the state's might and resources for the propagation of the religion, so that he was not secular. That is one thing. Second thing, you had mentioned about that Batala house encounter thing, and it has been in the news. The jury is still out. I also, as a professional police officer, have doubts about this encounter. But what you mentioned about that AK-47 bullets being in the head, I can tell you as a serving police officer, it's a very, very common thing, and it does not need great imagination. Whenever there is an exchange of fire going on, and people are in prone position when they are lying down, you will find that bullets do hit the head. If you are lying down and if you are firing or somebody is firing at you, you are bound to get hit on the head. It is very common. This is not one reason for suspecting that encounter. There may be some others. I thought I should clarify as a police officer. My strong differences with you are on 2 things. One is when you say...
You'll have to finish.
No, I respond to these first 2.
Yeah, I mean, that was just, I wanted to, ask my specific question I wanted to come to. See, on one hand, you have said that while mentioning about the Muslims not allowing the people coming to the walls and all, you have said about the concept of boundaries, that we are building up boundaries, which you are very, very correct. Boundaries on the basis of community, boundaries on the basis of caste, even now state, UP, Bihar, Maharashtra.
You have to ask your question first.
Yeah, okay. My question is, on one hand you are saying that, and on the other hand, when somebody picks up the issue of Kashmiri Pandits, if you are not having boundaries, then you are talking of inclusiveness. Why should you also be speaking of Kashmiri Pandits? After all, we have to need to go to the causes of these things. Second thing is about that Muslim thing which you have shown, the police people. I'm not sure whether I'm criticizing police or defending them, but when we talk of Punjab, we had terrorism in Punjab. We had Sikhs being picked up. We had Ulfa Asu. We had Hindus being picked up. We are not focusing them as Hindu terrorists. We don't call them. We don't call LTT as Hindu terrorists. But when we are fighting terrorism, be it in the most things in PWG over here, when we don't call them Hindu terrorists, and that is not covered in your lecture, is it not that you are framing the discourse in a partial manner?
Yeah. Firstly, about Ashoka, precisely what I was trying to argue is that our idea of secularism gives you the freedom to propagate your religion, but while doing it to respect other people's faith. And the edicts that Ashoka had issued about how people of different faiths and beliefs must be treated are edicts that I think no civilized country today in the world can claim to be following anywhere. So in my idea of secularism, it's not a separation or denial of faith, but it is one of respect for people of other faiths, and to that extent he's secular. Likewise, Akbar, at the very time when those very years when the Spanish Inquisition was going on, when enormous bloodshed, people in Spain were being forcefully reconverted from Islam to the Catholic faith. Those very years you had a king who was inviting people of every faith with great respect to his court. So it is that which I understand as our notion of secularism. Some people can say even secularism may not be the right word because it causes confusion. So secularism in the Western context is seen as separation and denial of religious faith, whereas ours is one of equal respect and freedoms, as long as they don't get into hate. You talk about the Jamia encounters. There's a whole range. I mean, actually, there's a whole range of reasons why it creates doubt. I mean, largely that it was if you had, there were 2 young boys who were in that place. There's only one exit on a 4th floor house. I would much rather, I would really say that if they were the masterminds of every terrorist attack in the country, one would have to actually get them alive. It's not difficult to have got them alive from a 4th-story house. It was impossible for them to jump. There was one small door through which they would have exited. They could have been smoked out. They could have been shot at the leg. There could have been many ways in which they could have been brought out alive, and we could have actually got the truth. I have no way of saying whether they were terrorists or not terrorists. The only thing that I have said repeatedly on Jamia is that there was a boy of 17 and there's a boy of 21. In many ways, I mean, they were there. This boy had his face thing on Facebook, and he said his favorite films were Mother India and Rang De Basanti, and they just sound like any other youngster. People who've known the family said the boy wanted to be an Air Force pilot. It can be one can argue that many such terrorists actually lead ordinary lives, and both things are possible. The only issue is that if you suspect somebody to be a terrorist, try to give that person a chance to prove that he's innocent or not. You cannot not only presume that the person is guilty, but also if he had shot Pragya and Lieutenant Colonel Purohit and said that they were terrorists and that's the end of it, it would be a very different story. And there will be a process of law in which these will have to be established. I demand that it should be done for everyone. That was my problem in the. And the last, on the question of, precisely, we've never talked about Hindu terrorism. We only talked about Muslim terrorism. As if, and that is, which of us has not got that SMS and actually believed in that SMS that every terrorist every Muslim is not a terrorist, but every terrorist is a Muslim. It's an extraordinary SMS for Indians to circulate, because actually we have lost the father of the nation and 2 prime ministers to terrorist violence. None of them, the people who have killed them, happen to have been Muslim. And therefore, now of course we have this whole thing of, I'm equally opposed to the term Hindu terrorism, which is now being used very widely in the recent context. I think that the whole characterization of a terrorist by their religious identity creates an image in the popular imagination of support by people of that whole religious community.
My question you kind of answered right now. I was staying in Bombay when the riots happened in Bombay. It was completely premeditated. They had electoral lists. They went around targeting Muslims. I lost friends. I had friends who left the city because of this. My question then and now, and if anyone kind of asks me about Hindu and Muslim, I'm a Catholic. So I really am a third party, and I grew up in a city which was completely secular, completely cosmopolitan. And I saw something kind of crazy happening. There were people who were totally secular, or so I thought, who were then attending Maha-Aartis. The Muslims were the targeted lot, so they really had no say. But why do we shy away from saying a Hindu terrorist? They were. Hindu terrorists happened long ago. It's not today's news. It's not about the pundits. It's not about the lieutenant colonel. It happened in Bombay. It happened in Gujarat. So my observation really is it because a majority of our country is Hindu that the rest of us, as well as all of us who are Hindu, are saying no to Hindu terrorism or not accepting it? I'm a third party. My question really is, why are we not specifying that there could be terrorism that is from within us, and it is there in all of our minds? The people we interact with, the people who sit at the side of us, in so many little different ways.
I think that there certainly have been terrorists from the Hindu community, right from the person who shot Mahatma Gandhi to the person who killed Rajiv Gandhi. To the people who have organized the carnage in Gujarat and elsewhere. But as much as I oppose the description of people as Muslim terrorists, I oppose the description of people as Hindu terrorists, because we never talked about Catholic terrorists either in the context of Ireland, and rightfully so, because I think that the linkage, it is actually a subversion of that faith that results in an act of, as much of Islam as it is of Hinduism. But it is true that we've shied away. I mean, I think there's still an enormous denial of the idea that terrorism could have arisen from Hindu lands, because we have a very strong self-image of ourselves that we can never be violent. I've seen it in macro ways, but I've also handled riots as a district collector. I recall people actually came to me with conviction. I was handling a riot in a small district called Khargon during this Ramshila period. And I recall that, you know, it was again completely one-sided violence against the Muslims. But you had, repeatedly you had people from the RSS and so on coming to see me and saying, we Hindus can never be violent. After you have actually demonstrated violence just right there. But we continue to have the self-image that we can never be violent. And at the most, if we argue with facts, then they say it's always retaliatory violence. And you say, what is it a retaliation against? It's a retaliation against 1,000 years of violence. The whole belief that Islam came to us on the edge of a sword is not true. Actually, if you have to go into history, I don't know why we need to go into history, but I'll say something again provocative. If there's one religion that has been spread by the sword in India, historically, it's Brahmanical Hinduism. So most of India was actually Buddhist till the 8th and 9th century, and there was an enormous amount of killing and violence, which wiped out. All of us would have been Buddhists. Most of us would have been Buddhists here, if that had not happened. But why should we hold people responsible for old history and written and unwritten? So I think that there has been a lot of violence as part of the tradition in Hindu society, as there has been in Islamic society, as there has been in in Christian societies, and there have been good people and men and women of great character and compassion and humanity in both. And so let us reach a point when we can address each other by the qualities of our character. And rather than the identity of these people.
How would you describe the recent... I'll just finish one quick one. You were talking of the hope that you have of the bleakness of the current scenario not being around. But I pay an occasional visit to Gujarat, and I find it extremely distressing that, and I happen to meet Hindus there. I find it extremely distressing that I'm always in a minority of one there amongst educated Hindus. That is the amount of brainwashing that has happened of an entire community, of an entire state. But that is not that's not just enough. I mean, here when you move around in educated circles, when you are in dinner parties and all, you will find a similar situation. Even in places like Hyderabad, where we are far more in a cosmopolitan place, and where you find that, I mean, Narendra Modi still remains a hero here. People still talk of all kinds of nonsense that you hear. Why is it so? And what's the way out?
See, I mean, I did talk about the globalization of prejudice, and this is precisely what I was referring to. I actually spent one of the most difficult years of my life when I decided to shift for a year to Gujarat in the height of this, to stand by the people who were affected and to fight their cases. And I lived in a small room with these people. But it was also the loneliest period in my life, not just because of the attacks and the hate and threats, etc., which worried me less. It was precisely that you could not talk to anybody, virtually anybody in middle class society, whether it was my former colleagues in the civil service, whether it was professionals, doctors, lawyers. I mean, everything was seen from the, I mean, you have so many conversations, but I mean, just to give a couple of them, there was the earthquake, and you had people saying, thank God, 30,000 Muslims less. I mean, this is actually, that was the response to the earthquake in Kashmir, Pakistan. But I recall one particular conversation where I got a backache and somebody taken me to some doctors in Apollo Hospital. So we started off with the same question of why are you not working on Kashmiri Pandits, etc. And we went on, which was fair enough, which is a legitimate question. But we went on to descriptions of of how Muslims are so violent and so on. And they said in communal riots, I've seen, they had this story that when, because they were all young doctors in the middle of communal riots, so they said that we used to see that the Muslims are really violent. So we had a policy. This guy, they're actually talking, they said we had a policy. If Muslims came in with injuries, we would never use anesthesia. We would use anesthesia only with Hindus. And everybody was sort of nodding and looking very approving. I mean, it's quite bizarre in the way that these are considered very legitimate. I mean, earlier, I think what has really changed in the last 10 or 15 years is that earlier if you had prejudice, you would hide it in your heart. And you'd feel defensive and it's not something that you would talk in polite conversation. Today, somebody like me, I've always, I find myself really, I'm really frightened of very few things, but one of the few things I've become really frightened of is going for an evening, out where my relatives will be there, or people I've grown up with, or people in the service, because I know that I will end up with some kind of, I'll really hear something which I would regard as so outrageously prejudiced, and I'll get into a battle and I'll lose a few more friends in the course of the evening. I mean, that's really become way of life.
I have a question. As you said about
Mic's here. I'll give you the mic next.
Believe me, it is very disturbing time for Muslims. Not only Muslims, all Indians. And we feel really very upset with the incidents all around. The question, in fact, I wanted to ask you is, the recent attacks on the Christians in Karnataka and Orissa, how would you describe them? What kind of a terrorism and by whom? That is something which is, the terrorism is spreading irrespective of the community. This is happening all over. How would you, I find very little hope, except when we listen to persons like you, otherwise we feel very gloomy.
See, what is happening in tribal society is even more frightening in some ways. I've served in a lot of my life. I've spent 20 years in remote tribal areas of India, and I've seen them change before my eyes. There has been a really systematic process of what I would describe as the systematic manufacture of hatred in these areas. I mean, say an Oraon Christian or a non-Oraon Christian, there was no difference. They were always together. They did everything together. Now you cannot have them. They created a situation in which they cannot, share a common platform. They cannot be together at all. And the tribal people are so dispossessed. They're suffering from many other kinds of enormous problems of survival. Then they have the militant Maoist violence, and now you have this penetration of the communal violence. And I think in the middle of all of this, I don't know where they're going to go. And there's always, like with people who are polite and say, it's all right, but let us have a debate about conversion. Which in some sense suggests that there is, of course, a legitimate sense of grievance that people are being converted and so on. When you look at the figures, of course, as with, as people say, for instance, like Muslims have 4 wives and 25 children and all of this. Now, if you really look at the facts, the census actually has indicated that bigamy is slightly higher among Hindus than it is among Muslims. But nobody is going to look at those facts. I mean, if Muslims had 4 wives, at least 3/4 of them should be unmarried today. Actually more, because the sex ratio is adverse for males. So, but you don't see, but we will continue to adhere to what we wish to believe, however, whatever relationship it has. Likewise, the Christian population, if there's been this great drive for conversion, on the one hand, of course, the Constitution guarantees the right of people to propagate their faith. So, even that is conversion in evil, or which we need to all oppose and be frightened about, is a question that can be debated. But Again, the census data has not shown any. I mean, in fact, the Christian community has
But there is a
remained.
difference because in Kandhamal,
Kandhamal is one state where there has been a substantial increase in the Christian population, but not in other places which have had violence. For instance, Jhabua had about 1%. I mean, after 110 years of the Catholic Church, the Christian Church working there, they have about 1 point something percent. But it had major
no, but in
riots.
Kandhamal it was 133%.
Tanmir% has about 25% Christian population. There has been a substantial increase in conversions there. How that conversions have taken place, whether they have happened voluntarily or not, is a matter that I think needs investigation. But what I'm saying is that we should not link the discussion of violence against the Christians with the question of conversions. I think they're two independent questions because there is a tacit legitimacy that is given to one. Likewise, whatever problems the Muslim community might have is one set of problems which need to be addressed. There is patriarchy. I think there's patriarchy in Hindu communities as well as there in Muslim communities. There's large families or whatever other problems, lack of education. Let us address those. But if we talk about them in the same breath as when we're talking about violence against Muslims, there's a tacit justification, and that is the only thing that I have a problem with.
So I don't think that's the answer. So I will exactly answer the question right from the horse's mouth. It's a very pertinent topic. I'm sorry if I'm interrupting, but I'll tell you this from the horse's mouth. Right from the top, bureaucracy of Orissa, which happens to my immediate family, I'll tell you. The statement that I have had my uncles and coming home is like high command se pressure abhi push mat karo. Have you observed that why the church demolition or against Christians happened only in BJP ruled states, in Karnataka and Orissa? It's a very simple electoral vote tactics that BJP always plays. They failed there and they made themselves miserable out there in Jammu Kashmir when they wanted that. Forgetting the name of the place, when the place was lease and all that. So this is what they tried. I think it's a very simple thing. That's what they did there. And that's pogrom as you described just now.
Next question.
Yeah, so I'm saying that is the truth, but it is also true that there has been a massive increase in conversion. And I think the two discussions have to be had separately, because precisely of the reasons that you said. Yeah.
Mr. Harsh, in your talk you said, if proven guilty and conviction is death, you will stand by the verdict. I would like to ask you.
I never said that. I oppose the death penalty consistently. I was quoting the mother of some young men who were charged with terrorism when they said that they would like to see their sons publicly hanged if it is proved that they are terrorists. And I was saying all they were seeking is that there should be evidence by the normal process of law. And I think that is something that we must grant.
Yeah, but if proven guilty, in case of Afzal Guru, who has been convicted for death, is taking so long, does it not provoke a particular community against a particular community? What is your opinion?
No, I mean, I'm opposed to the death penalty in general.
It may not be death. Okay, even if you are opposing to death penalty, let it be life imprisonment.
Yep. Life imprisonment is going on with Afzal Guru.
No, that is going on, but it is not a verdict. The verdict is death. The President of India is not able to decide.
See, the President of India is only seized of the matter of whether it should be death penalty or whether it should be life imprisonment.
No,
nobody is talking about his.
Why is taking so long? Why is taking so long to take a decision?
Okay.
The file is yet to go to the President. The file is yet to go to the President.
It is a matter that has been raised, that the tempers have been raised very high. But, I was just in Delhi yesterday, just incidentally, I was in Delhi yesterday. Among the other anguish of the families there, this was really one of the most unbelievably brutal massacres happened by their neighbors. They've listed 600 and odd people. FIRs have been filed against them. The AGP government came and has actually withdrawn every single case. There's far from death penalty to be reduced to life imprisonment to anything. There's no case at all. So I hope you are equally exercised against that.
We're allowing last 2 questions. That's it.
No, are you, can I ask you, are you equally exercised about that? Are you outraged when I tell you this? You're not. So that's really the problem. That's really the problem.
That would be secularism. You should be outraged on both sides, not just on one.
Yeah. That's the law in the country which you have to respect.
There's no law for the people in Delhi. I mean, I have lost, I met, this woman who's seen somebody hack her child into pieces, or somebody has lost his entire mother, father and brothers and sisters, wants that the law of this land should operate, that they should be tried in a court of law. He knows who they are.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if that outrages you, I'm a little relieved.
What are your opinions about a uniform civil code for the citizens of the country, and do you think such a thing is possible in the country at all?
I'm hugely in support of a common civil code in this country. I believe that a voluntary access to a common civil code must be the right of every person, especially for women. I think that every religion, every organized religion in the world, including Buddhism, which is otherwise one of the most equitable religions, has been extremely unjust to women. And personal laws deny women their rights. So I do believe, I wish India had gone in much earlier for a common personal, for a uniform personal law, code. But the spirit in which this discussion happens makes things openly to be communally charged. I mean, I never heard people saying that we are deeply worried about how Hindu women, don't have inheritance rights, they don't have this right, they don't have those rights. That in Christian personal law there are these problems, in Muslim personal law there are these problems. Therefore, we want a common civil code. We continuously say they can have 4 wives, somewhat enviously, I think, and that they can do talaq, and therefore, and therefore we want a common civil code. That is the problem, because there's no authentic concern for gender justice in the discussion around a common civil code. But I do believe that we must have a common civil code.
I just have one quick comment and then a question. So the comment is just that today is the 27th of November, and I always remember that on the 26th of November we adopted our constitution, and I think that we should have a constitution. As an Indian, I believe we should have a constitution day, and we forget that the important thing is also the rule of law in the state, and the rule of law should have declared the people who destroyed the Babri Masjid as anarchists. They are against the state, not just against a particular community. That's my comment. Secondly, the question was that I just wanted to bring to the attention of this audience, and another element in this whole communal notion of India, the idea of a communal India, and that is NRIs, NRI Indians who fuel what happens here. I've been living in England for some years now, and I've had cause to live abroad before, because I've been studying abroad. And when Gujarat happened in 2002, I was in England, and it was not covered. The international community hardly spoke about it. The BBC hardly spoke about it. They were talking about Gaza. At that point, there was a face-off in Gaza. And people I spoke to about Gujarat were horrified. And they could not believe that this would happen in India. Today, I live in Cambridge, and we've started a protest for somebody called Dr. Vinayak Sen, who is a doctor in Chhattisgarh who has been imprisoned on false charges of being with Maoist rebels, and because he's been helping Adivasis. Right. Sorry. And people still ask, and when we stand and we have mounted a protest, etc., and people ask us, could this really be in India? And I should be proud. I perhaps should be proud that my country has such a wonderful image abroad that nobody believes that human rights abuses happen in India. If this had happened in Iran, everybody would be talking about it. But because it happens in India, and we are a democracy, and because we're not a Muslim state, everything that we do passes unnoticed. And I have a problem with this. Even though I'm very proud to be Indian, my question is, should we, is there
should we as Indians also mount a protest against this international image which allows us to go ahead and do whatever we want in this country? And is that patriotic?
Yeah. No, I think that I think it's intensely patriotic to stand up for justice, because that is and for the rights of people to live together, because I think that's the only basis on which a country as diverse as India can ever stay together. The NRI question is a complex one. I'm often called to speak overseas, and I must confess to be sufficiently nationalistic to be equivocal in my discourse, only because I always qualify. I describe in great detail what happened in Gujarat, but I qualify it by two things. One is that I do believe that the majority of people who are fighting against the injustice in Gujarat also are Hindus. About 90% of them are. And that is significant and very unique to what we have. And that we do have a democratic constitution with flaws, but it is still there. And I think that it is that dual story that needs to be told. But I think the NRI question there's another aspect to it which is much more complex, and that is that a lot of the communal organizations are funded substantially, and this has been well documented. And it's somewhat really ironical. I really find, Obama has nominated somebody who is an office bearer at the BHP into his transition team, Sonal Shah. Now, it's a very interesting story, and when one goes a little more closely, I find that the Gujarati Hindus in the US are the strongest supporters of the Democrats. They provide a huge amount of money to their campaigns because they believe in minority rights there, and they believe in it very strongly. But they refuse to apply those same standards when they are here. When some of you ask me why am I talking about Muslims, it's precisely because I believe that if you belong to the majority community, that is where you have the responsibility to speak for the minority community. If you are the minority community yourself, of course you will speak for the minority community. And democracy is not about the will of the majority alone. That is majoritarianism, which can lead to fascism. The test of democracy is how it protects the rights of the minority and the weakest.
There was one point of view of NRI community in the US who was supporting communal groups in Gujarat for land, because the Muslims were running away, so they would get the land when they came back to India. And this is a huge thing with the US and with India.
On a lighter way,
so
if somebody is envious about having 4 wives, they can get converted into Islam. Indian law allows it.
Can I have one quick small question? About the beautiful term globalization of prejudice against Islam. I have studied Islam, and I can tell you it's one of the most progressive religions, gives more powers to the women. What do you think are the underlying causes for this prejudice, global prejudice? Is it the Samuel Huntington concept of clash of civilizations? Is it the oil in the Middle East? What are the causes for it? And what do you think are the solutions to it, to solve this thing?
It's a long, I just give a very brief answer. I do think historically it's very interesting. During the Cold War there was there's no global, the global enemy was not the Muslim. It was the communist. After the collapse of the Cold War, it is almost as if global capitalism needs an enemy, needs the other. And there was a systematic manufacture of the Muslim as the global enemy. I think that is there, and it is linked to oil and it's linked to many other factors. But there is, the Muslim was the same, 30 years ago or 40 years ago. Why is it that we've suddenly globally discovered this enemy amongst us, whom we never used to think about earlier as an enemy?
I think we should close now. We will close now, sorry. I think despite the fact that with every party that you go for, you lose friends, I think you've got about 150 new friends over here. Thanks very much.
For the last 3 years, we have had many Manthans here. There have been very few instances when I've had tears in my eyes. This is one of them. There have been very few instances when for over an hour there wasn't any movement in the audience. This was one of them. There have been very few instances where you could see what a true good human being ought to be. One of them. Thank you so much, Harsh, for having come and spent a wonderful evening with us. I do hope some of our Modi worshippers have got converted today. That would be a good contribution that you could make to the Hyderabadi society. Many, many, many thanks to you for having done that. This was a wonderful evening. May I request Kali Sudeep to come and present a small memento to Mr. Harsh Mander on behalf of all of us. Thank you so much. Thank you. That was wonderful. Absolutely.